Good morning and welcome to Artefact Live, where we look at the art and science of storytelling. My name is Scott MacArthur. Well, we're on show 39. Now, I remember saying on cam about 6 months ago that I never thought we'd ever get to show 30. We're almost at 40, guys. So welcome to the show and thanks very much for tuning in, and a special welcome to the Twitch guys. I can see you there. Thanks very much for coming in. Never know what I'm going to get from the Twitch community. It's not always pleasant, but never mind. I'm delighted to have you here. Thanks for tuning in. Well, this week we're going to be focusing on the media, and I've got an absolutely fantastic special guest, a very, very special guest in Bill McFarlan. But before we talk to Bill, I'd just like to remind you what we did last time. We had Tony Brassington on. Now, Tony is a really interesting example of a storyteller. Now, you know that if you've tuned in before, you'll know that I've got a couple of things that I'm very keen to get out there to the world. The first one is this, that I believe that stories are so important that they can act as an empathy engine. Now, as President Obama said there in the introduction, there's nothing like a story. It is so, so powerful. And I think Tony touched on that really quite beautifully. But the thing that really got me about Tony was Tony is a forklift truck engineer who has published 12 successful books. And I love that, because what he's done is he's taken his experience, regardless of how he's making his main living, and he's started to become and get out there in the world as a storyteller. And I love it. And being an archaeologist of your own life, the other thing that I'm really keen for everyone to remember is something that I think Tony did beautifully. So thanks for being on last week, Tony. I know you're watching today. It was an absolute pleasure having you here. So, and then just before I introduce Bill, one last thing that I always say at the beginning of the show. I've got a Facebook group now called the Empathy Engine, which won't surprise you given what I've just said. And if you are in there, and we're growing slowly, there are people in there, and you want to add comments on the live stream today with Bill or ask questions, and you'd like your name to appear, click that little link there. It's also in the Empathy Engine right at the top of the Facebook group, and that will enable your name to appear rather than just coming up as Facebook user. And the final thing is, if it's the first time tuning in, please let us know who you are and where you are, so we can say hello. So thank you very much for putting up with all that nonsense at the start. I have to do that every week. So this week, I am really quite excited about this week because for two reasons. One, it's about the media. And those of you who have seen me speak either on the keynote stage or on this show before know that I have some pretty major concerns about the way the media is developing, and also some great hopes for the way the media is developing. So it's a very complex picture. And though I know about the technology side of it, I'm not a media expert. And today we've got a media expert in, and that media expert is Bill McFarlan. Now, those of you from Scotland won't need an introduction to Bill, but my audience isn't just in Scotland, unfortunately. And Bill is a very, what they say, a well-kent face in Scotland from his days in television, which I will get him to talk about in a minute. But he's also been somebody who, Bill, I know Bill's watching here, about 20 years ago, I came across a book by Bill about pink elephants. And I'm not going to tell you about that, as I'll let Bill say hello and tell you about that. But that actually really helped me in my consulting work. And I probably never told Bill this, but it was actually really important to me, and it really helped me be successful as a consultant. So let me just get Bill on and we'll say hello. Hello, Bill.
Hi, Scott. How are you?
I'm good. Good to see you. It's been a long time, mate.
I know. I'm delighted that that book made an impact on your business.
Oh, it did. It was one of these. It was one of these stories. Well, could you tell them what it was about? Tell the audience what your book was about.
Well, let me tell you the story of it. For many years, I had run training courses on how to deal with the media and how to make better presentations. And around 2001, I was thinking, gosh, some of my stories are getting quite tardy, quite old. And, you know, I may have to stop using them. But they were wonderful stories, but they were time dated. I went on holiday to Mallorca with my teenage kids and my wife, and it was the last holiday we all had together in 2001. The kids were growing up. You know, you see plenty of them and our grandkids now. But then you know, it was a heat wave. We went to Mallorca, boiling hot, and a lack of air conditioning in the hotel. We spent most of our days in the pool. But I, as I always had a notepad and a pencil beside me, a pencil. And I just took notes on some of these stories. Before I forgot them, I thought I must just keep them somehow. And before I knew it, I was writing chapters. In fact, I was standing in the pool one day, almost up to my neck in the cool water with my pencil and pad writing away. And a guy swam over to me and he said, sorry, I've been watching you the last few days. Are you writing a book? And I said, I may be. So I got home and I realized I'd written maybe 3/4 of a book. That was in July 2001. In the December of that year, my wife and I went off to Portugal with a view to potentially buying a flat there, which we did actually. But we managed to find what we wanted in 3 days and still had 4 days left. So I set about each evening completing this book. And then I sent off sample chapters to friends and asked for their feedback and fine-tuned it. Yes. And then I finally sent off some sample chapters to 6 publishers. And 5 pink slips arrived saying, thanks, but no thanks. I got a phone call anyway from Wiley Capstone, from one of the publishers. And the fellow said to me, I literally retrieved your sample chapter from the bin. Clearly, somebody just thought it was rubbish, literally. And he said, but I thought it had potential. Could we meet? So I flew down to Gatwick Airport. We met. And the result was this, Drop the Pink Elephant, which we published in, thank you very much, in March 2003. And by speaking to people like W.H. Smith and so on and giving them advance warning of it, it became W.H. Smith's best-selling business book of the month. That was 18 years ago. It's now in 8 languages. It remains the best marketing tool I've ever had. And it's full of little stories, most of them very old, about things that happened to me that shaped all my views on communication. And I'm absolutely 100% with you, Scott, because storytelling is the key to introducing your thinking to other people by anecdotes and things that have happened to you that have influenced you.
And so I hope you found that introduction interesting. And Bill's work, and I'll put the book back up again, Drop the Pink Elephant, is terrific because it's the sort of work that, you probably come across other books with these quirky titles and thought, things like, the Sumo Leadership or The Naked Leader or other people who have written books like this. But I find Bill's book one of the best ones because he questions the way we tell stories, and he also enables us to, or helps us see that sometimes the stories are not right, or sometimes there's more to the stories than you think, which is really interesting because often, when you're watching something in the media, and this is really relevant to today, and I'm sure Bill will talk about it if we can get this technology working. In the media today, you see things happening and you think, really? Or you think you hear something else from what they're saying that actually is hiding something, and that's what a pink elephant is. And the famous one that Bill talks about in his book is about Bill Clinton saying, "I did not have sexual relations with that woman," and that's what he would call a pink elephant. It was pretty obvious what Clinton was saying, but nevertheless, he said it. So that's what that book's about. Well, not only about that, but it is partly about that. So
my point really is that somebody might think that your work is rubbish, and clearly 5 publishing companies thought that it was, and a 6th had already put the work in the bin. But a book that's now been in circulation for 18 years says somebody saw the potential in it. And in life, it's all about connecting with people who see the potential in what you do. And that, to me, taught me a big lesson that you've just got to have belief in yourself and keep on going until you find the right person who, in this case, can publish your work. And it's been a great marketing tool for me ever since.
Yes. And that is such an important lesson. It was, if at first you don't succeed, try again and keep the heed, as they say in Glasgow. Yeah. So could you tell the audience, the trajectory of your career? Because obviously the media, we're looking at the media today. What was your sort of introduction to the media, Bill?
I was good at English at school and liked English, and I had a curiosity. And if you like, if you love English and you have a curiosity, you've got the right ingredients to become a journalist. So I set off in journalism school in 1975, and I managed to get a contract with a company that had a whole lot of local newspapers. And this was tremendous grounding for me because I worked in papers like the East Kilbride News before Lorraine Kelly went there and beat her path to fame. And then I went to Kilmarnock Standard, the Johnston Advertiser, the Paisley Daily Express. So what that did was it taught me how to write stories so that people could read them and understand them. And then I went to Radio Clyde in Glasgow. And I remember my news editor saying, you've got to be so crystal clear in radio that people get what you say first time. He said, now, if you wrote a paragraph badly on the Paisley Daily Express, I could reread it and understand what you meant. If you write it badly for radio, you're unable to rehear it. So you have to be even sharper with broadcasting. So I had 3 years as a Radio Clyde broadcaster, and then I was ready to move to television, to Scottish television. I remember the night I was asked to go through to Edinburgh to read the news, and I said to the news editor, Frank, I've never seen autocue, so I don't know how it works. He said, "Oh, it'll be fine, son. You'll get the hang of it." Which was my training for reading the news. But I had read 3,000 radio bulletins by that time. Right. And then you become a television broadcaster. Now, there are three figures to know about communication. One is that 7% of the message comes across in the words, 38% in the pace and tone, and 55% in the body language. Or you could say it's words, tone, pictures, which is what you and I are passionate about, talking in pictures. And because I started in newspapers, I learned how to write the words. I then went to the pace and tone bit, radio, and then I went to the visual bit, television. So for me, Scott, this was the perfect path to understand more about communication. And I'd only been at the BBC 4 years when I left my daytime job at the BBC to set up my company, then called the Broadcasting Business, now Pink Elephant Communications. And that was way back in 1989. And since then, I've traveled to 25 different countries across the world, running 4,000 seminars, telling people what I've learned about communication to help them present better and to deal with the media.
The part of your story that where I first encountered you was when you were a sports anchorman.
Yeah.
And I was funny. I was looking back, and don't worry, I'm not going to show any pictures.
Oh, that was funny. No, I'm happy.
Yeah, but I was looking back on it, and it was the thing that was also interesting was that looking back at the old film of you and the old pictures of you back in was it the 80s, Bill? Was that when you were doing
I started in television in 1982. Yeah. When I was at the BBC, I suppose I was doing most sport at the BBC in Scotland between 85 and 89. And then I went to BBC Breakfast News in London and did 4 years there doing sport as well.
Yes. And how did you find that? I mean, is it interesting? Is it difficult? How do you bring sport to life, or does it do it itself? I mean,
it does it itself. But I'll tell you why I wanted to switch to sport. Well, I mean, first of all, I was always a sports fan. I was known then as the fan with the typewriter, now the fan with the mobile or the fan with the laptop. But the other big thing for me was you can get worn down by covering news. I mean, I remember Caroline, my wife, when we were going out in the 1970s and she got into my Hillman Imp or whatever the car was then, she picked up a wedding photograph that was in the passenger seat. She said, "Oh, that's a lovely bridal photograph. Who's that?" I said, "That's the dead couple." Because I had the photograph because this couple had been killed in a car accident. And there is a point when, as a journalist, you have to decide, do I want to spend my life covering the tragedy of daily life? I mean, I covered child murders and all sorts of things that we need to know about, that's important to know about. But if you cover it all the time, there's a danger you go down one of two paths, and that is you become cynical. In some ways, it's a protection method. You cut yourself off from feeling empathy about it. And therefore, I've known a lot of people, journalists, who've become cynical. The other path I believe you can take is to become enlightened. And so when I watch a human interest story of tragedy, I often switch it off because I say, I'm afraid these things happen. It's just part and parcel of life. But rather than wallow in it, I'm just going to say, I'm sorry that's happened to them, and I'm going to move on. And that to me is just becoming enlightened about the whole thing. So the reason I switched to sport in 1986 was you interviewed the winner. And in these days, you only interviewed the winner. Before the Sky contract says you interview the miserable loser as well. But there is a big thing in that. I've watched football managers become very good at handling the crushing disappointment of defeat seconds after the final whistle. And it's a difficult thing to deal with, you see. So one of the reasons people are very suspicious about the media is sometimes the media broadcast things that they would rather not hear, like your team's lost. Yes. Or why they lost. Or we heard Steve Clarke, the Scotland manager, have a pop at the media and everybody else saying, oh, they were all critical after our game against the Czech Republic, and it was unfair. What an opportunity to talk about the wonderful performance against England. But instead, he got too caught up, in my view, about the criticism that had been relayed by the media. And my point about that really is, it's often the media that relays the criticism rather than creates the criticism. There'll always, as we know from social media, be people who disagree with you or criticize you or have something to say about you. And as Eleanor Roosevelt said, what other people think of you is none of your business.
Yes, it's a classic. Yeah. That leads us to the area that I'm sure you knew we'd talk about, and that is the BBC itself. I'd be fascinated in your perspective. And I mean, it looks like, I mean, I'm not a journalist and I've never worked at the BBC. I've worked with the BBC, but I've never worked in the BBC. It looks like, if you read certainly the social media world, that the BBC's prominence as a broadcaster has lost some of the shine. Now that hurts me because I'm a massive, I love the BBC. I absolutely love it. I'm not so keen on the news often, maybe because of what you've just said. I hadn't thought about it like that. But what's your perspective in someone who knows the journalists, knows the quality of the people, understands some of the history and the impact the BBC has made? What's your perspective on it in terms of the contemporary perspective on such a formerly loved, and I still love, the BBC? What do you think about it now?
So perspective is the key word here, and it remains the most trusted news source in the world. Now, let me tell you what it's like being a journalist at the BBC. I used to have news editors who would say to me, what's your second source on this? Not what's your source, what's your second source? How do you verify this? And here's an interesting question. What is the truth? What is the truth of any situation? I would answer that by saying, well, that depends on how far you're willing to go to establish the facts. And then how are the facts presented? Are they presented with a twist or a spin? And the reality is, I'll tell you what happened to me. A Stirling University student asked if she could follow me round for a day in the 80s as a BBC journalist. And then after each interview, she questioned, why did you ask that question? And what was behind that? The truth of the matter is, you just ask what comes to your mind. You ask what you believe is a reasonable question to ask. And often what you say is, now your critics might say, Prime Minister, that. But what has developed over the decades is, I would say, far more personality has become prominent in the media. In America, for example, you've got Fox versus CNN. You've got, the Republican Party versus the Democrats. And that has changed the world's perspective of the media. They are clearly both biased in a certain direction. Now, I used to have to fill in logs when I was at the BBC that said the number of seconds that I'd given to each of the political parties in a piece, because we've got something called the Broadcasting Act, which stops you from being politically biased. Now, are we biased still? Well, I went to the Museum of Tolerance in Los Angeles decades ago. And a Jewish guide said, well, ladies and gentlemen, we're going on the Holocaust tour. I'm going to invite you to go through the door on the right if you're prejudiced, and go through the door on the left if you're not prejudiced. And there was a stunning silence. And I stepped forward to the door on the right. And he said, you better follow him because we're all prejudiced. That's my perspective, Scott.
Right.
Whether we like it or not, we have prejudice. But I, as a Rangers supporter, I could present a Rangers-Celtic match, crushed that my team had lost to their great rivals, and say, well, what a performance by Celtic. And in particular, Paul Lambert was the standout player. Let's just look through some of the great moves involving Paul Lambert, because what you have to do is overcome that prejudice. The same, if you're voting Labour or Tory or anything else, you've got to overcome that prejudice and present the facts as you see them to the audience, what you believe is the most unbiased way.
Do you think, and you touched on it a minute ago, I think, but do you think that in it's probably the last 10 years, if not the last 5 years, or what do you think the impact of technology has been on that situation you've just described? Because that was very clear. very fair-minded. Do you think technology has changed that?
The danger with technology is it can rush you into broadcasting things before you've checked them out, because you can, because you can get it there first. Now, again, you'll tend to find that the BBC will be slower to broadcast a major piece of news at times because they want verification. I mean, the classic example was, it was known in the media for some time that Diana had died in the crash of 1997 in Paris before they dared to broadcast it. It is such earth-shattering news that you'd better get it right. So BBC will sometimes be one of the last to broadcast that. You get it on social media straight away. But I always say the way people use social media makes broadcast journalists like me look like the most responsible people on the planet, because there are rules, there are hoops to jump through, and there are people checking what you say. But here's a snapshot of modern technology. When I worked in newspapers, there was me as a reporter. There was a sub-editor who would write a headline and check your spelling and things like that. And then the editor would look at the pages and proofread them himself or herself. And then the paper would, as you called it, go to bed, go to press, and it'd be published. I picked up my local newspaper here several years ago, and it said something like, Wimpy, the Giffnock-based builder, has went into receivership. Now, people who live in Scotland know that that's a common way people in Scotland speak. It's went into receivership. But people who know the Queen's English says, well, it's gone into receivership. And by the way, receivership is spelt EI rather than IE. So there was two classic mistakes in the first sentence of this paragraph, the lead story. Now, your question was about technology. That's because it's possible for the journalist to get that straight onto the page without anybody checking. And therefore, two people lose their job along the way because one journalist can do the job of three. And the victim is accuracy. So what we have to be careful of with technology is that we remain accurate in what we're saying, and that we have it checked before it goes out.
I mean, I think the facts question, I mean, there are many people, many commentators now talk about us being in the post-facts era. I just scratch my head at that. I find that quite interesting. I mean, obviously, it's just a term that's been used across the media. I worry about that, Bill, if I'm honest, because I used to be, my training is as a scientist, and I used to always look for evidence. I would always say, a bit like, it's quite interesting that your editor said about secondary evidence, because that's exactly the scientific process. Now, you must start with your prime sources in science, and then you look for supporting sources. That's exactly how it works in the scientific model. But what I've noticed, well, it's not Scott MacArthur's noticed, everybody's noticed that there's now so much data coming at us that it's very difficult. And I'd like your perspective on this. I mean, I remember during the election, the last election, I've got a friend who's an MSP, and I've got a friend who's an MP. The MP happens to be a Tory, the MSP happens to be a Labour guy. And they both said to me they thought the BBC was biased towards the other party. It was a classic example of how you use the word perspective is so important.
So when I worked for the BBC in London, for example, the Conservatives were in power and Labour were cozying up to the media years before Blair became Prime Minister. And that's what happens. The opposition parties do a lot of cozying up to the media. But then, of course, as soon as they're in power, the media will publish anything that they really don't want to hear, because the opposition are now criticizing them. Now, the media's job is to get to the truth. And of course, some people just don't want the truth out there at all. That's the same for political parties, for big business. It's the same for anything. But what is the truth? And I would say the truth is determined by how far you're willing to go to establish the facts. I ran a media training course a few years ago, Scott, and I said to someone, let's talk about the truth. I said, now, Mr. Al-Megrahi, is he the Lockerbie bomber? And somebody said, yes, he is. I said, and why did you say that? He said, because he was found guilty by a court in The Hague. I said, yes, he was. So does that make him the Lockerbie bomber? Yes. I said, no, that makes him the man found guilty by a court in The Hague. I said, in my opinion, the wrong person is in the dock. It was Abu Talib is the Lockerbie bomber. He planted the bomb in that, in my view, having researched it thoroughly. And he said, no. He said, if you can't accept what the court says, then you can't accept anything. I said, oh, I beg to differ. Are you telling me there's never been a mistrial? So you see, but of course, what judge wants to read that this was a farce of a trial? You know, what police force wants to read that? What government wants to read that, and so on. So the media will always be the enemy at times to people who are in power, because it has the ability to unseat them or to expose their hypocrisy. But let me just say this: to me, the media is the greatest unchanneled use of power that you and I have access to if we do it. I mean, if I remember rightly, Scott, we first met because you've got a great interest in music and you saw my wife was organizing Blast from the Past concerts for charity, right? I think that's how we met.
Yeah.
Is that right? Now, what did Caroline do? With my help and my knowledge of the media, she spoke to newspapers, radio and television and said, I've got 5 acts from the 70s who are like the legendary Bay City Rollers and the late, much missed Les McEwen, you know, who are willing to give up their time and their talents free of charge to help me raise money to buy Sunshine variety coaches to help disabled children get to the seaside for the day. And that was because Caroline was running her own charity, raising money that way. And free of charge, she helped to raise £200,000 over about 10 years through these concerts and Oktoberfests and duck races. And how did we make it work? We channeled the media. We told the media about it. Now, by the way, if the media realizes you're stealing money from your charity, they will also publicize that. And that's what people dislike. But if you're doing things honestly, with integrity, and you're doing the right thing, and it's for a good cause, and you've got the moral authority, the media can get behind you, and it's free, but you've got to learn how to plug into it.
And there's a very natural follow-on question, but just before we do that, there's a question here from a comment rather from Graham Rose saying the BBC has done a good job in reporting the Bashir criticism, open and transparent journalism. What's your perspective on the Bashir case?
Well, it's fascinating because I worked for the BBC at that time, and for a week I maybe stopped telling people I worked for the BBC at that time. Well, the reality was I was held to account by the highest standards of journalism in the 25 years in which I was actively in journalism. The BBC had the highest standards. Now, clearly, you've got a rogue reporter who has conned a lot of people, including his news editors along the way. What disappoints me is the lack of robustness, first of all, in the BBC checking out the authenticity of what he was saying, but anybody can be duped. But then when doubts were raised, the real problem to me is that they failed to check it out properly and investigate and report. Now, you see, what I've always liked about the BBC is you'll get, I remember Peter Allen, one of my favorite broadcasters on Radio 5 Live, would say, so I got an email in from John in Hartlepool. He says, this program is utter rubbish and Peter Allen is the worst broadcaster the BBC has ever hired. It's 5:25, time for the sport. And I love that Peter Allen would read out his scathing criticism of himself without feeling, well, I think that's a bit unfair. So the BBC has generally down the years been very good at broadcasting criticism of itself. And it broadcast and led on scathing criticism of itself this time. My disappointment is it failed to do the right thing last time. You know, I was working with a client yesterday and they said to me, we've uncovered some unsavory material, a tweet that somebody sent out some years ago. And I'm wondering what we should do about it. I said, you should publicize it.
Yes.
He said, really? I said, yes, you should. I said, because you see, the thing is, if you fail to do that, you're the problem now, not them.
Yeah.
You're the problem. And this is what the Catholic Church experienced with paedophile priests. It's what we experienced when the police covered up what they did at Hillsborough. They made a genuine mistake in an emotional situation and let fans in at the wrong end of a ground that was already overcrowded. And if they on day one had said, we made a mistake, my estimation of them would have rocketed. But of course, what happens is it plummets. And the media's job, if you like, is to tell the story of all that. So to go back to the point about Martin Bashir, a huge own goal. They recover some kudos by the way they have reported it themselves. And I watched the panorama on it.
Yes.
And because it's one of very few incidents I could recall about the BBC in recent years, I would say that's why they're still the most respected news source in the world. Another was when they showed the picture of the Queen storming off from a portrait sitting, when in fact she had been hurrying towards it. And so big row about that. And again, that is misinterpretation, sometimes deliberate misinterpretation to make the story more interesting. But if that's who you are, then forget working for the BBC, because it's better than that.
Yes. You've given us some clues already, but I'm going to ask for some free consulting now. You're clearly someone with a vast, experience in this. How would you help people who are trying to, come up with a story, come up with a way of maybe it's a brand story, maybe it's a personal story about your own capability or your interests? How would you advise they start telling me? It sounds to me like clarity, honesty, and then bravery. That's kind of what you just said.
So what stops a lot of people from going to the media is they think this dog of the media might turn around and bite them, It can be a guide dog, and I've yet to hear of the guide dog that bit its owner, but the guide dog can lead you places and change your world. Now, one of my friends in PR describes dealing with the media as dancing with Rottweilers. So I would be conscious of the Rottweiler. But the way I see it is, let's say you have a story in your community. I'm going to say in the middle of England, right? Is anybody interested? Well, your local paper is probably interested. So you've got to start by saying, what kind of person would be interested in this story? So I've got a device, and I call it a pyramid of communication. Let me see if I have a copy of my pyramid of communication here. I may have left it in my other studio. Now, here we are. So let's look at this. I see here's a pyramid of communication. Now, every story in the world has point number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 in order of importance to the audience that day. So my 3 questions are this. 1, what are the facts of the story? Just write down, before you try to write a story, just write down 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 facts about the story. Second question, who's your audience? This is vitally important. If you work out who the audience is and that they were sitting in front of you having a cup of coffee, how would you tell them that story? The answer is you go straight to number 1. There we are there. Number 1, right at the top. What is of most interest to them? And you start with the most important thing to them. So the 3 questions are: 1, what are your facts? 2, who's your audience? 3, what's of most interest? Start with that. And that's how you organize your story. Now, if for example, somebody in my area of Glasgow here had won £1 million on the lottery, that's big news in the local paper. It's certainly going to get a mention in the national papers in Scotland. Will it get a mention in Winchester? No, just too far away, you see. So it's of descending interest and importance the further you go away from the seat. But coronavirus is a good example. We're all interested because it's all over the world and it's affecting everybody. This is the singular story in my lifetime that has affected most people in most ways. It is quite remarkable. So, but we're always interested in the big question, what's in it for me? So if I'm the audience, you've got to say, if I'm going to read this, why would I be interested? But the media is made up of thousands of pots, a local paper pot, a local radio pot, a television pot. Start with the ones that are most interested and see if you can develop it beyond that to gather more interest in your story.
There's one thing that it might be human nature, but it's very, very obvious to anybody who spends, time on the contemporary communications, in social media, that there are certain things that are always successful, Bill, and it's not very nice. There's either, young girls shaking their backsides, there's people acting like clowns, and then there's the death and horrible stories that you talked about at the top of the show. Have you any thoughts on how someone who is trying to get their story out there but doesn't have any of those attributes, there may be an intellectual, or there may be a marketeer, or there may be they're running a media company. How do they get out there? I mean, I don't want to use the word viral, but I kind of am using it. How do they become, in your view, viral? How does that hit the audience?
Well, viral is a difficult thing because viral means it's made an impact with a lot of people. I mean, I watched a piece in Breakfast News this morning. It was by far the most interesting thing. And it was a group of teachers, all in performing arts in a school in England, who had done a number from The Greatest Showman as a thank you and send off to their 6th year pupils. And, you know, I found it quite emotional because these teachers really cared. And this has gone viral. Now, that's because I can relate to being in my last year at school. I can relate to my kids being in the last year at school. I can see the great work these teachers are doing. I saw The Greatest Showman. I thought it was a fabulous, fun film. I can relate to all these things. Now, if you are a scientist and you've got a very specific topic, you go to The Scientist or New Scientist magazine or whatever magazine. Watch Have I Got News for You? And they'll come up with all the weird and wacky magazines of the day from which they take their headlines. And, you know, just find out what magazines exist that cover this topic and you start there. But if it's interesting enough, it can spread across the world. But sometimes, does it really need to go viral for it to make its mark? Perhaps it just needs to meet the community that's most interested in it.
I mean, I have friends who, they call it niche in the world I work in. You find your niche and you really, which is about understanding your audience. And one of my friends, she's a trainer, and she trains accountants who are women and who are over 50. I mean, and she has a very successful business. You know, and some people think that's far too niche, but it's not for her. You know, she can very much focus on that speciality, and it really works for her. So yeah, thank you.
For example, Scott, I could see that appearing on BBC Breakfast News because a lot of women over 50, especially when they've had a family, think, well, what do I know now? I've fallen way behind. I'm off the corporate ladder. But there's somebody who's saying, no, you have experience, you have a role. I'll help you get back in. And that's interesting. Now, it's as a man over 60, I can be interested in that because it's a societal thing. I happen to think that the older you get, the more knowledge you've got, the more useful you can be if you channel that information and channel that skill. So my point on that would be, you might start off with an accountancy magazine. You might start off with a paper local to where this organization is set up, but that can go across the world.
Well, we're racing through the time already, and there's a couple of things I really want to ask you. So forgive me if I just go on to the next question. Have you seen yet, or have you a view on the latest development in GB News, this new channel that we've got everyone talking about on social media?
So, you know, because I largely stay off social media, the answer is I have flicked onto it for 3 minutes. I doubt if I'll be watching it much because I know what it's doing, and I know it's appealing to a lot of people who say, I am fed up with political correctness. What I'd say is political correctness in many ways is correcting the imbalances of society. The trouble, I think, if you watch BBC again, you can think it's become so woke that everything is so politically correct that they're terrified of saying anything about anything. And to a certain extent, I believe that's true. You know, I'm friendly with one broadcaster who said, I am the wrong ethnicity and the wrong age now to be used by mainstream programs. And I said, you were the right age and you had the right regional accent in the 80s, which I did as well, to be used then. And if you like, things go in waves and you've got to capture that wave. Now, GB News, well, good luck to them if they can build an audience and offer a different point of view. Without seeing too much of it, Scott, to me, the danger is it becomes a type of Fox News, and it represents a more extreme view. I have to say, I am the most moderate of moderate people. I, for example, am against Scottish independence because I believe this country would be stronger as part of the United Kingdom. And yet I find it so difficult to relate with a lot of the nonsense that goes on with Boris Johnson and the government in London. But I sat with my brother a few weeks ago outside in the garden, and he is for independence. And we had a very rational, calm debate about it because there are two sides to every argument. What bothers me is that today you seem unable to put forward one set of opinions without being rounded on by the other side. And that worries me. Was it Voltaire who said, I may disagree with every word you say, but I would lay down my life to give you the opportunity of saying it.
Yeah, lovely.
I've forgotten that.
Lovely. I mean, I think the thing that worries me with that, Bill, I'll come back to GB News, but the certainty is one of the things I always worry about in someone. You know, that's another thing you mentioned with age. You know, when I was 21 in Edinburgh, I was selling Socialist Worker on the high street. I was, you know, all the rest of it. And I was certain that that was the solution to all the problems of the world. It clearly isn't, but you can only see that, I think, personally with experience. And there is a question coming here, because but one of the, I don't know what you think about this. One of the things I am reasonably receptive towards the GB News idea is that I mean, I read The Guardian, so that'll give you a hint at where my politics are. But I actually don't see enough of a rational right of centre perspective. You know, that isn't nonsense, isn't trying to find the truth. You know, so I would like there to be. You know, I'm very happy with my Guardian, but that's my bubble. You know, I like to try, and that's maybe my scientific training again. I like to try, and I quite like Andrew Neil, and I quite like the historian on there, the Scottish guys. I quite like them. You know, I quite enjoy them. I don't know if I agree with them, but I quite like them nevertheless. But for me, I'm okay with it. But the problem that I've seen is it's again this crashing into certainty. Everybody's having a go at. Well, sorry, a lot of people on social media is having a go at them, and it's like they've only just started. You know, give them a chance. You know.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that's something you've thought about, but I worry about that. I worry about these knee-jerk reactions from politicized groups from all sides. It's not just from the left or the right. I mean, I'm of a view now that I think the left and the right has probably come to the end of its time, useful time, but that's another debate with another 100 people. But have you got a view on that? Is that something you've
I remember in the 80s being attracted to the Social Democratic Party and Shirley Williams, because I thought that there was a caring socialist side and empathy, a word I know you're very keen on, and empathy about these politicians that sometimes can be lacking with the extremities. I believe that there's a place for all these channels and for those who want to watch it. To me, the danger is that we live in the echo chamber of our own views and we only watch one view. So whether that's GB News or whether that's the mail that you buy, and that's all you buy, I would say if you want to establish perspective and, dare I say it, the truth, look at where all the media crosses over and social media to see what do people agree are the facts here, because that's more likely to take you towards the truth if you do that. But you have to have a wider perspective than just any one channel or any one newspaper.
And wouldn't it be great if we taught that in our schools?
Yeah, it should be on the agenda. I mean, the whole thing, the media is much misunderstood in many ways. I was golfing the other day and this fellow said, "What do you do?" And I said, "Well, part of my job is I show people how to deal with the media." He said, "Oh, I know how to deal with the media. Don't talk to them." So now, first of all, that's quite rude when you're in the second hole of a golf competition. Because he turned out to be a diver and had dived for lots of companies down the years. If I said, "Here's my view on diving, don't, it's dangerous," that would be the same kind of rudeness. But the point is, what I then did was I gave it a whole of the golf course just to talk about other things. And then I said, "You've clearly had a few media experiences. Tell me about them." And basically he was approached by some programs about doing, you know, let's feed sharks underwater. Let's do that. No, it's far too, I'm not doing any of that, he says. I said, right, okay, it's like this. The media is there for you to plug into if you want to use it. If it comes to you, you can decide you want to deal with it or not. I said, but it's a bit like saying to someone, "What do you think of the police?" Well, when they pull me over for doing 83 miles an hour in a 70, I'm a bit afraid of them, rather sheepish and annoyed, all in one emotion. And that's how some people can feel with the media when it comes to them saying, "Yeah, you're being criticized for X, Y, and Z." I said, the police are my best friends on the 2 occasions when my house has been broken into. Couldn't it be more helpful? So when you're proactive and go to the media, you get the best result. And I would say, I'd say to anybody, if you've got something to tell that you'd like to share with people, think of the best basket in the media to put it into, approach them. But at the same time, if you're going to do that, that's your plan A. Your plan B is, what if I'm asked questions about this, that, and the other? I need to have good answers to that, good, robust answers. In the same way, Scott, that I'm unsure what you're going to ask me next. What I'm what I'm more sure of is my experiences to draw on. That's often where we can then tell the truth about what's happened to us. Because here's the great thing about experiences and storytelling. I know it's the truth of the stories I'm telling you that they did happen to me. And you know your truth as well. Opinions are when you decide to tell everybody else, I know the truth, here it is. And it's actually just your opinion. And that's what annoys us most, is opinions being dressed up as the truth. Only experiences are the truth.
I mean, you've given so much advice in that short period of time, Bill. I have to say thank you for that. It would be absolutely remiss of me, though, to, I don't know how you're feeling, but are you as nervous as I am about today?
Scotland playing Croatia. Yeah. You know, I have lived through World Cups, European Championships, qualifiers. I've been to Hampden on many occasions. It's happened in rugby as well. And I have been crushingly disappointed on so many occasions. Scotland played very well against England. If they play as well as that tonight, they stand a chance. They have to score a goal. Now, they've scored goals. They are capable of scoring goals. They have to score 1 goal more than Croatia to set up the next disappointment in the next one. Okay. Now, but having said that, I am the eternal optimist, and I am optimistic that Scotland can somehow carve out a 1-0 win. But you know, what is optimism? But a futile exercise, especially
it's a fool.
Scotland.
I think I'll be going back to my childhood tonight. I'll be watching it from behind the sofa through my eyes, as if I'm watching Doctor Who. You know,
this is the fun of live sport, and this is why sport's great compared to politics. We know that anything can happen. Bizarre things can happen. The goal the Czech Republic scored against Scotland from the halfway line was a wonderful piece of football and a bizarre piece of defending all at the same time. But that can happen in sport, and that's why we love it. And all the best to England as well. I'd love to see England do well. Too many people, I'm afraid, want to see England trip at the next hurdle. I believe Gareth Southgate is a very, very good communicator and man manager. And I wish him all the best.
Yeah, me too. His letter to England before the championships, I thought was a work of genius. I really did. I thought it was brilliant.
Absolutely
brilliant. Well, Bill, that has been an absolute, I can't believe it's 50 minutes already. That has been terrific. And there's a number of things you've given us, you know, a way to think about structuring stories. You've given us a way to think about how we relate to the media and how, and what's been really, really nice to watch and hear is how with every question you reflected on, and nearly everyone, you reflected on an experience. You didn't give an opinion. You know, you lived that that advice that you gave at the end. So thank you for that.
That's a pleasure.
It was lovely. If my audience would like to, you know, see more of your work or to get in touch with you, how would they best go about doing that, Bill?
So you can look at our website, which is Pink Elephant Communications, pinkelephantcomms.com. And, you know, during lockdown, everything we did was face-to-face training until March 23rd of last year. And suddenly we came to this cliff edge where everything stopped. And we'd been in business for more than 30 years. So we quickly got online and started doing trainings like this online. And that remains very successful. We've reached out and now do them all over the world without having to fly. We are now going back, I'm delighted to say, to face-to-face training. We've got a studio in Glasgow, but we travel all over the world when it's possible to do so. But we also built the Pink Elephant Academy, which is how to deal with the media, how to improve your presentation skills, how to build self-belief, all these things. And so that's all available. You can go on to our Pink Elephant website to see that. I also wanted to say, Scott, you asked me to bring along an artifact. I know I brought the book with me, but there's a good story behind this because I wanted to hold up this piece of paper. And on the face of it, here is this piece of paper that's about 35 years old. There it is there.
Yeah.
All right. And it's got some writing on it and a whole lot of signatures. Now, among the signatures are Phil Collins, Tony Hadley, Sting, Bananarama. Any idea what that might be?
I have no idea.
All right. So here's what happened. I was working for Scottish Television. I went down to London in November 1985 just to do a couple of weekend shifts for them, hoping to break into ITN in London. And on the Saturday, I was sent on a wild goose chase down to Poole in Dorset. The story just failed to materialize. I came back Saturday evening. The news editor, unusually for a news editor, was quite apologetic. He said, I realized that was a waste of time. He said, look, there's a bunch of musicians going to a West End studio tomorrow morning to make a charity single. You want to ask for a Bob Geldof, and he's behind this department. So, you know, if you're there at 8:30 in the morning, film them coming in, do a chat with Bob, and but get them to sign a disclaimer. We're not paying musician union fees for anything we broadcast. So I thought, oh, that's quite a lineup by the sounds of it. I'm going to take not even a triplicate, a quadruplicate piece of paper.
Yes.
Sign it all. I'll give the top copy to ITN. I don't know where all the copies went. Maybe it was a triplicate. I gave a copy to my young sister-in-law to take into school, and I kept that copy. And that was me reporting on Band-Aid, which became Live Aid the next year, which was the beginning of this whole idea that musicians can give their time and talents to save people from living in impoverished conditions and change the world. They did. They started to change the world. So that was my little piece of history.
Wow. That's fantastic.
That is a story for you, Scott.
That's a cracker. That's a cracker. There's a certain amount of crossover between that and the other work I do. You know, the funny thing I do with the old Glasgow Apollo thing. And the guys would love to hear that story. I must tell them it next week.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's fantastic. Thank you. So you've made me, I'm smelling so much, it's hurting. Right. Well, thank you, Bill. That was absolutely fantastic. And thank you for bringing the artifacts in particular. That was lovely. Thank you very, very much for being on the show. And I hope sometime we can talk again, because I suspect, well, I know there's a whole load of other things we could talk about, like
anytime.
It would be great to talk to you again. Bill, thank you very much for joining the show.
Okay,
thank you.
And thanks for watching, everyone.
Thank you. Well, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did once again. That was brilliant. That was a stroke of genius, that bit at the end. Really, really was good. As you can see, it's really lit my face up because it was quite lovely. But no, I think just to recap what Bill said, there was certain things there that I thought really resonated with what we've been doing over the last 9 months now. The part where he started, he talked about words, tone, and pictures. That resonates very much with what we talked about in terms of the arts, in terms of writing, in terms of structure, in terms of human behavior, in terms of, you know, tone of voice when we had Ben on. So I think that was wonderful. And I loved the bit towards the end where he started to talk about, you know, knowing your audience, knowing how to actually meet that audience's needs and how to get a particular perspective on it. So I really, really thought that was packed with value, and I'm extremely grateful to Bill. So thank you, Bill. And I really do hope we get back again. On the subject of back again, next week, and I've got it's amazing how in the last few weeks things have become, I think things are developing in a very interesting way. And then next week, we've got a guest here who's Elizabeth Hearn, who's going to come on, and she's going to talk. I'm not going to tell you what she's going to talk about because it's a very personal story, but another incredibly powerful story for someone who works in the self-leadership area, and I'm terribly excited about it. And I can't wait. I can't wait to talk to Elizabeth next week. And then the following week, as if you've been watching me on LinkedIn, you'll know I've got Professor Rob Brunner on, and it would have been amazing to have Rob and Bill on at the same time, because I think the debate we had about evidence and about how to use evidence would be one that would be very much interesting to have the three of us talking about that. So maybe that's the beginning of a cunning plan. You never know. I never know. So thanks for tuning in. Now remember, as I say every week, every single week I say this because I really believe it's important. And I think Bill proved it in many ways as part of his chat with us today, that stories are so important because they help you see the world and understand the world through the eyes of other people. And because of that, I do genuinely believe that they can act as an empathy engine. And the fuel that you put into the engine is all the work that we've been doing together for the past 40 weeks. Can you believe that? 40 weeks now from next week. I'd love you to go away from today thinking about your own stories. Think about the style that Bill adopted today. Think about how he did it, every question I asked him, he said, I was talking to somebody in the golf course. I remember, working with the BBC. He brought everything round to a story, did it quite beautifully. I really enjoyed it. And then he pulled the one out of the bag at the end, which left us all hopefully smiling. So I hope you enjoyed that. Thanks very much for tuning in. This was Artefact Live on the art and science of storytelling. My name is Scott MacArthur. We'll see you next week at the same time. Good afternoon.